It was a hot afternoon in Southern California. The sun blazed across the asphalt, turning the busy streets into a shimmering mirage of heat waves. Cars lined up at the gas station, their drivers rushing through the mundane task of filling up tanks, buying drinks, and moving on with their days. It was an ordinary scene, almost forgettable except for the presence of one man sitting quietly in his black SUV. From behind his tinted windows, Tiger Woods watched the world in its hurried rhythm, his mind drifting between thoughts as he waited for his turn at the pump. Little did he know that what he was about to witness would change the course of his day and someone else's life forever. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The woman working behind the counter caught his eye almost immediately. She wasn't someone you would expect to see at the center of attention, yet there was something about her that struck him deeply. She looked to be about 8 months pregnant, her belly large and her movements slow though determined. Her uniform was slightly rumpled, with the faintest sheen of sweat on her forehead that told the story of her day. A long, grueling shift with no rest in sight. Despite this, her posture was one of quiet perseverance. She smiled politely at customers, filled their orders with calm precision, and even managed a soft word of thanks as they left the store. Tiger Woods, sitting in the comfort of his air-conditioned car, couldn't stop watching her. He was no stranger to hard work. After all, his life had been defined by discipline, perseverance, and grit. From his days as a young golfing prodigy to becoming one of the greatest athletes the world has ever seen, he understood better than most what it meant to push yourself beyond your limits. But there was something different about this woman. She wasn't chasing championships, trophies, or glory. She was doing something far more humbling, showing up for her shift, working tirelessly, and carrying the weight of her unborn child on her feet all day. For what? A paycheck that probably didn't stretch far enough to cover rent, let alone the costs of having a baby. He couldn't stop thinking about her, even as the line of cars moved forward and it was his turn to fill up. Sliding his sunglasses onto the brim of his cap, Tiger stepped out of his car and began pumping gas. Yet his eyes wandered back to the gas station window, where the woman's figure moved behind the counter. Every so often, she would rest a hand on her back, a small attempt to soothe the inevitable ache of pregnancy. The sight unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He tried to shake it off, focus on finishing up and driving away, but the image lingered, gnawing at him in a way he couldn't ignore. After paying for his gas, Tiger decided to step inside the store. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper. A pull he couldn't define. He pushed the glass door open, the bell overhead jingling softly as he walked in. The cool air hit him immediately, a welcome contrast to the heat outside, and he took a moment to look around. There were shelves of snacks, rows of refrigerated drinks, and a line of weary travelers waiting to pay. At the center of it all was the woman. She didn't notice him at first, too busy ringing up customers and stocking small items behind the counter. Up close, Tiger could see the exhaustion in her face. Dark circles under her eyes hinted at sleepless nights, and her hands, though steady, moved with the careful slowness of someone whose body was demanding rest. Still, there was something striking about her. Her smile, though faint, was real, and the way she treated each customer with respect and kindness revealed a strength that spoke volumes. When it was his turn at the register, Tiger approached with an energy that seemed to make the woman pause. She greeted him politely, glancing up only briefly before looking back down to total his items. He noticed her name tag. It read Elena. Her voice was soft as she asked if he needed anything else. "Do you ever get a break?" Tiger asked, his tone light but curious. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked up at him, blinking in surprise, as if unsure whether he was joking. "Not really," she admitted after a pause. "We're short-staffed today, and most days, to be honest." He nodded, his brow furrowing slightly. "How long have you been working here?" "A few years now," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something unspoken. "It's a good job. Keeps the bills paid." "And you're doing all this while you're pregnant?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. She smiled faintly, her hand absently brushing against her stomach. "Baby doesn't stop growing just because I'm tired. I've got to keep going." Those words struck him like a punch to the gut. There was no bitterness in her tone, no anger or resentment, just a quiet acceptance of her circumstances. Tiger had spent much of his life surrounded by luxury, by private jets, championship trophies, and homes most people could only dream of. Yet here was a woman who had none of those things, working harder than most people he knew, and asking for nothing in return. Tiger paid for his items, thanking her before stepping back out into the heat. Yet as he walked to his car, something inside him twisted. He couldn't just drive away, not after what he'd seen. Something about Elena's quiet strength, her relentless perseverance despite the weight of her situation, stayed with him. He thought of his own mother, who had sacrificed so much to help him pursue his dreams. He thought of the times he had struggled, of moments when life had tested him, and how he'd only succeeded because someone had been there to lift him up. He sat in his car, the engine running, staring at the gas station through the windshield. His mind raced, trying to think of what to do. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know her story, where she came from or where she was going, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave without doing something to help her. After a moment of contemplation, Tiger turned off the ignition and stepped back out of his car. He made his way back into the gas station, his steps purposeful. Elena looked up as he approached, clearly surprised to see him again. "Did you forget something?" she asked politely. Tiger shook his head. "No, I didn't forget anything," he replied. Then, without preamble, he said, "Do you know who I am?" She blinked at him, clearly taken aback. I think I do," she said slowly. "You're Tiger Woods, the golfer." He nodded. "That's right. And I want to help you." Elena's brow furrowed in confusion. "Help me?" she echoed, as though the words didn't quite make sense. "Yes," he said firmly. "I see how hard you're working. You're on your feet all day, doing everything you can for your baby. You shouldn't have to do this alone." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a checkbook and pen. Without hesitation, he began writing, the scratch of the pen loud in the quiet space. Elena stared at him, stunned. What are you doing?" Tiger didn't look up as he filled in the check. When he was done, he tore it out and handed it to her. "This is for you," he said, his voice steady but kind. Elena looked down at the check in her hands. The number written there made her gasp audibly. It wasn't just a small amount. It was enough to change her life. Enough to pay her bills, take care of medical expenses, and give her the chance to take time off after the baby came. "I can't take this," she stammered, shaking her head. Tears welled in her eyes and her hands trembled as she held the check. "This is too much. I don't even know you." Tiger smiled softly. "You don't need to know me," he said. "I've been fortunate in my life. People have helped me when I needed it most, and I want to do the same for you. You're working harder than anyone I know, and you deserve a break." Elena looked at him, her eyes full of disbelief, gratitude, and 1,000 emotions she couldn't put into words. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Tiger replied. "Just take care of yourself and that baby." As he turned to leave, the gas station fell silent. The other customers who had watched the scene unfold stared in awe. Some whispered to each other, while others simply smiled, moved by what they'd just witnessed. Elena stood behind the counter, clutching the check to her chest as tears streamed down her face. For the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders felt just a little lighter. Tiger walked back to his car, slipping his sunglasses back on as he started the engine. As he drove away, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the same as winning a championship or sinking the perfect putt, but it felt just as good, if not better. In that brief moment, he had made a difference, not because he had to, but because he could. Word of Tiger Woods' quiet act of kindness spread quickly. It wasn't a story he had intended to make headlines, but the impact resonated far beyond that small gas station. People praised him for his generosity, his humility, and the way he had taken notice of someone most others might have overlooked. But for Tiger, it wasn't about praise or recognition. It was about doing what was right, about recognizing the quiet heroes who keep the world moving, even when no one is watching. For Elena, the gesture was life-changing. The money gave her the freedom to rest, to prepare for her baby's arrival without the constant worry of how she would manage. More than that, it gave her hope. It reminded her that even in the toughest moments, there is kindness in the world, a reminder she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, the heat of the day began to ease, but the events of that afternoon lingered in Elena's mind like a vivid dream. Standing behind the gas station counter, her fingers still trembled slightly as she tucked the check into her pocket, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. What had started as just another grueling day had transformed into something beyond comprehension. An extraordinary act of kindness from a man she had only ever seen on television. Someone whose life was galaxies apart from her own. The bell above the door jingled as another customer walked in, breaking her daze. She shook herself back into the present, smoothing her uniform and smiling as though nothing unusual had happened. She was still Elena, still working the counter, and she still had a few hours left on her shift. Yet inside, she felt like something had shifted. For the first time in months, maybe even years, hope flooded through her. The exhaustion weighing her down seemed just a little lighter now, as if the burden she carried was no longer solely her own. When her shift finally ended, Elena walked to her car in the dim glow of the parking lot lights. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and distant traffic. She sat in her car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as tears welled up in her eyes. The check felt heavy in her pocket, its significance more than just financial. It was a lifeline. A stranger, no, not just any stranger, but Tiger Woods, had seen her, really seen her, when most people would have walked past without a second thought. That, more than the money itself, made her chest ache with emotion. Driving home that night, Elena couldn't stop glancing in her rearview mirror, as though somehow the moment might slip away if she wasn't careful. Her small apartment waited for her, sparsely furnished but clean, with mismatched dishes in the sink and the faint hum of an old refrigerator. The walls were decorated with a few photos, her family, old memories, dreams of better times, and a small corner had already been prepared for the baby. A crib stood there, though second-hand and slightly scratched, with a neatly folded blanket resting inside. Elena had put it together herself weeks ago, on one of her rare days off. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. As she sank onto her worn couch, the exhaustion of the day finally caught up with her. She placed the check on the coffee table in front of her and just stared at it. It was real. She hadn't imagined it. A single piece of paper had the power to change everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the weight of it all hit her. She thought about the baby growing inside her, the life she wanted to give this child, and the sacrifices she'd been willing to make to ensure they had a chance at something better. For so long, she'd been running on empty, surviving day by day, paycheck by paycheck. Now, for the first time, she could breathe. The next morning, Elena woke early, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her bedroom. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to lie in bed for a moment longer, savoring the quiet. Normally, she would have to hustle to get ready for another shift, grabbing breakfast on the go and rushing out the door. But today was different. Today she had a choice. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen as she prepared to call her manager. It felt strange, almost unnatural to request time off, but she knew she had to. This wasn't just for her, it was for her baby too. She needed time to rest, time to plan, and time to figure out what her next steps would be. Her manager, though surprised, agreed to give her a few days off. For the first time in years, Elena allowed herself a deep, relieved sigh. Over the next few days, Elena's world began to change in ways she hadn't thought possible. She visited her doctor, something she'd been putting off for weeks because she hadn't been able to afford the copays. The doctor reassured her that both she and the baby were healthy, though she needed to rest more. She sat in the quiet waiting room afterwards, her hands resting protectively on her stomach as she thought about the life she was building. The money from Tiger Woods wasn't just a gift, it was an opportunity. Elena sat down with a notebook and pen later that evening, mapping out her plans with careful thought. She would take some time to rest before the baby arrived, ensuring she was healthy and strong when her child entered the world. Then, she would start fresh. She had dreams, small ones maybe, but dreams nonetheless. She'd always wanted to go back to school, even if just for a short program, to learn something that would give her a chance at a better job. Now, she could make that happen. At the gas station, word of what had happened spread quickly. Customers who had previously passed her by with barely a nod now stopped to talk to her, their faces lit with curiosity and warmth. "You're the one Tiger Woods helped, right?" they would ask. Their voices filled with awe. Elena would smile, a little embarrassed but grateful, and nod. She wasn't used to being noticed, to having people pay attention to her story. It was humbling and strange, but she took it in stride. She had always believed in staying grounded no matter what life threw her way. The days turned into weeks, and Elena found herself feeling stronger both physically and emotionally. She hadn't yet used all the money. She was careful, cautious, wanting to make every dollar count, but the freedom it gave her was life-changing. One afternoon, as she sat on a park bench watching families play with their children, Elena thought again of Tiger Woods. She wondered if he realized just how much his gesture had meant. It wasn't just the money itself, but the reminder that there were people in the world who cared, people who saw others when they needed it most. For Tiger Woods, life went on as usual, or at least as usual as it could for someone of his stature. He returned to tournaments, his name once again filling headlines and sports broadcasts. Yet in quiet moments, he would sometimes think of that afternoon at the gas station, of the woman with the tired eyes and quiet strength. He never spoke publicly about what he'd done. It wasn't something he felt needed to be shared. For him, the act had been private, born out of instinct and compassion, and he preferred to keep it that way. But the story, as stories often do, found its way into the world. A customer who had been at the gas station that day recounted the scene to a local journalist, who turned it into a small piece in the paper. From there, the story spread, picked up by media outlets and social media platforms alike. People were captivated by the idea of a global sports icon quietly helping a stranger, asking for nothing in return. It wasn't just the money, it was the humanity behind the gesture that struck a chord with so many. Fans praised Tiger for his kindness, though he brushed off the attention whenever it came up. "It was just the right thing to do," he would say simply, offering no further explanation. Those closest to him, however, noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. He seemed more reflective, more attuned to the world around him. Perhaps that moment at the gas station had reminded him of something important, that no matter how much success or fame a person has, they are still part of a larger story. Everyone has struggles, and everyone has the power to make someone's day just a little bit better. Months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She held him in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of love into his tiny ear. It was a moment she had dreamed of for so long, a moment that not so long ago had seemed impossibly far away. But now here he was, perfect and safe in her arms. She named him Michael, a name that meant gift from God because that's what he was to her. As she sat in the hospital room cradling her son, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. The long hours, the exhaustion, the days when she had wondered how she would keep going, and then that moment of unexpected kindness that had changed everything. She promised herself that she would raise her son to know the value of hard work, perseverance, and kindness. She would tell him the story one day, not to impress him with the name of Tiger Woods, but to show him that there is good in the world, and that sometimes the smallest acts can make the biggest difference. In the years that followed, Elena's life continued to improve. She enrolled in a certification program that allowed her to secure a better job, one with benefits and a steady income. She moved to a slightly bigger apartment, one where Michael had space to play and grow. Her life wasn't glamorous or extravagant, but it was stable, and it was hers. She often thought about Tiger Woods and the way his kindness had set her on this path. Though she never saw him again, she carried his gesture in her heart like a quiet flame, a reminder of the power of compassion. Meanwhile, Tiger continued his career, winning tournaments, breaking records, and inspiring millions of fans around the world. But there were moments, in the quiet spaces between games and victories, when he would remember that day. He would think of Elena, of the gas station, of the child she had been carrying, and he would smile. It was a memory that kept him grounded, a small but powerful reminder of what truly matters in life. Years later, when Michael was old enough to ask questions, Elena told him the story. They sat together on the couch, her son listening with wide eyes as she recounted that fateful afternoon. "Why did he help you, Mom?" Michael asked, his voice filled with wonder. Elena smiled, brushing a hand through his hair. "Because sometimes people see someone who needs help, and they choose to do something about it. He didn't have to help me, but he did. And that's what makes him special." Michael thought about that for a moment, his brow furrowed as he considered her words. Then he looked up at her and said, "I want to help people like that one day." Elena's heart swelled with pride as she hugged her son close. "You will," she whispered. "You already have a good heart." And so the story lived on, not as a tale of fame or fortune, but as a testament to the power of kindness. Tiger Woods' simple, selfless act had rippled outward, touching not just Elena's life, but countless others who heard the story. It was a reminder that no matter who we are or where we come from, we all have the ability to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is noticing someone, seeing them for who they are, and choosing to act. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Tiger Woods helping a pregnant woman at a gas station? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.